Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here. And when the Google Pixel 4 and Pixel 4 XL started to leak, Google did something a little bit unprecedented here. Instead of ignoring the leaks like a company might traditionally do, Google actually embraced it and confirmed that, yes, this is the Pixel 4, this is the final design. And not only did they confirm the final design, they also gave us a sneak peek into some more advanced features, like a new hand gesture system called Project Soli, complete with front face unlocking. Furthermore, by confirming this design, Google was also confirming that the back of the Pixel would have a bigger square camera bump, and this time have two camera lenses, a first for Google, who traditionally said that you don't need a second lens. So with a brand new design, new fancy hand-waving gestures, and the addition of a second lens on the Pixel 4, just how good is this smartphone? Let's start with the design of the Pixel 4. Now, this is something that I think some people are going to disagree with me on, but hear me out. So this year, Google is opting for what I would call a more traditional design. Last year with the Google Pixel 3 XL, Google opted to put a notch on that phone, and a lot of people didn't really like it. It kind of went in a little too deep for most people and was more noticeable than, say, something like the iPhone X's notch. This year, Google decided to forgo that by not having any sort of camera cutout or notch and just putting in a bigger forehead, with the rest of the phone being covered by flat bezels, no fancy edge-to-edge screens like you might find on a Samsung phone. The back of the Pixel 4 now features a squared-off camera bump that has two lenses, a wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens, and houses other sensors like the microphone and the flash. The back of the Pixel 4 depends on the finish you get, so for this one that we're reviewing, it is the clearly white version, which has a more matte finish. The sides of the Pixel 4 XL also have a more matte finish than you might find on other premium flagship phones. On the side of the white version, you'll also find an orange power button for a nice color accent. On the same side, you'll also find the volume buttons. In combinations with the matte feel of the glass back and the matte sides, this makes the Google Pixel 4 XL one of the grippiest phones that I've personally ever used, and it makes it less likely to slip out of your hand. On the bottom, you'll also find a USB-C port and a bottom-firing speaker. The Pixel 4 XL retails for $899 for the 64GB version, or $999 for the 128GB version I have. Sadly, it only maxes out at 128GB, with no room for increased storage options, so if you're planning on storing a lot of photos or a lot of 4K videos on this device, well, you might be left wanting more. I would say the overall design of the front of the phone just feels a little bit outdated compared to other smartphones on the market. The Pixel 4 XL also comes equipped with a Snapdragon 855, which on Geekbench 5 will get you a single-core score of 629 and a multi-core score of 2,434. This is a bit of a controversial move, with the Google Pixel 4 XL being released towards the end of the year and Google not adopting a faster processor like the Snapdragon 855 Plus. And on the Android side of things in general, Qualcomm is still behind Apple in processor performance. However, a nice upgrade going from the Pixel 3 to the Pixel 4 is that this year Google opted to put in 6GB of RAM instead of 4. Back when the Pixel 3 launched, Google had a lot of RAM management issues. When you were switching between apps, you would have to constantly refresh them and other apps might close down in the background. This year with the Google Pixel 4, that problem is solved. During my use with the Pixel 4, I never felt like RAM was an issue. I didn't have apps that were constantly refreshing, and I didn't feel like apps were closing too frequently in the background. Let's talk a little bit more about the Pixel 4 XL's display, because Google's doing something a little different here with the Pixel line. The display itself is a 6.3-inch OLED display with a resolution of 3040 by 1440. Which, if you're doing your math, gives you a very high pixel density of 537 pixels per inch. Overall, the OLED display is good, with very deep black levels, very good color accuracy, and just overall a very pleasing screen to look at, whether you're browsing through social media or watching video. However, this time around, Google is opting to go for a 90Hz display refresh rate. This 90Hz refresh rate should, in theory, give you a smoother experience when interacting with the screen. So interactions like scrolling should look smoother on the device. I think where I notice the increased screen refresh rate the most is when you're using Android 10's brand new gestures, which honestly borrow a lot from a certain smartphone that shall not be named. But basically now you can swipe up to go home, swipe on the bottom of the screen to switch between apps, and swipe and hold up to get into the app switcher. You can also swipe on either the left or the right side to access the back button. However, with the Pixel 4 XL, even though it has this 90 Hz display refresh rate, I couldn't really notice it in all my interactions. Sometimes when scrolling, I would notice this slight stuttering. Now, if I really controlled it and kept scrolling up and down, I could notice the increased refresh rate, but only very slightly. I think this might be something to do with the software on the Pixel 4 because during the keynote, Google mentioned that they are using a variable refresh rate to conserve battery. So when you're not interacting with the device, the refresh rate should lower back to the standard 60 Hz, and then when you are interacting with the Pixel, that's when it kind of goes up to that 90 Hz refresh rate. And at least to me personally, the 90 Hz refresh rate just didn't feel as smooth as other high refresh rate devices that I have used. But that's a small complaint, and maybe you'll notice this increased refresh rate more than I do, but overall I do want to say that the display is still good. Now, besides just having a good display, it is also accompanied by some pretty good speakers. This year, the Pixel's 4 audio comes out from a top front-firing speaker and then a bottom-firing speaker. And overall, the speakers got plenty loud and were pretty clear. Speaking of the 90 Hz refresh rate, a big concern for a lot of people was that by having this increased refresh rate, the battery life might not be as good on the Pixel 4 or 4 XL. And sadly, I think those fears might be slightly true. Now, with the Pixel 4 XL, I would say that I average around 5 hours of screen on time. That's not necessarily bad, and it will definitely get you through a normal day of use, but if you're going through a heavy day of use, say you're watching a lot of YouTube videos, or you just have the phone screen on a lot that day, well, you're definitely going to have to charge halfway through the day. Again, it will get you through an average day of use, but when we're comparing it to other phones out there, like the iPhone 11, which I recently reviewed, I was getting around 6 hours and 30 minutes to 7 hours of screen on time. And I was getting even more of that on my iPhone 11 Pro Max. So it's not that the battery life in the Pixel 4 XL is necessarily bad, it's just that some of the other flagship smartphones that were released this year have really increased battery life, and when you get used to that, it can kind of seem like the Pixel 4 XL's battery just isn't up to par. So like we mentioned at the start of this video, the bigger bezel on the top of the Pixel 4 XL is to house new technology for better face unlocking and the new radar chip for Project Soli. Google claims that the face unlocking system in the Pixel 4 is the fastest in any smartphone, and I would say that this claim is mostly true. Now, one of the big reasons that is because of the radar chip inside of the Pixel 4. So anytime you go to reach for your phone, it instantly starts to wake up the Pixel. Then as you lift it up to bring it to your face, the face unlocking system starts scanning your face, and then unlike the iPhone, where you can just kind of see your lock screen preview, Google automatically bypasses the lock screen, bringing you either to your home screen or the last app that you were on. Combined with the accuracy and the speed of Google's face unlocking system, anytime you pick up your phone, it usually recognizes you pretty much instantly, and it is a very fast experience. Now, there are some areas where I noticed that Google's version of face unlocking fell a little bit flat compared to the iPhone's Face ID, and that is when it's laying flat on a table. It doesn't work as great as the iPhone does at picking up those different angles. And sometimes the face unlocking system won't work in very bright sunlight. Also, third-party applications need to be updated in order to support the face unlocking biometric. That being said, that issue is minor, and I think the Pixel 4's face unlocking is the best face unlocking tech I've used on any Android device yet. I much prefer it over having a fingerprint sensor, and I think Google was right not to include one. Now, even though I really like the face unlock, unfortunately it does work even when your eyes are closed. Google is promising a software update to fix this, but it's going to take them a couple of months to work on. The second feature housed in that sensor array is what Google is calling Project Soli, that is using a radar system to enable hand gestures on the Pixel 4 and Pixel 4 XL. Now, unlike the face unlocking system, which is great, the hand gesture system is often frustrating. Now, the main area where I tried to use this hand gesture system was skipping in between songs. So in theory, you should be able to just wave your hand like this and skip back from a song, or wave your hand the other way and then skip to the next song. Now, I say in theory because oftentimes this was very hit or miss, requiring a very, very precise wave that you kind of have to learn. And when I mean precise, I mean precise. And not only did this wave have to be very precise, it also had to be done in a very quick and violent motion. So some of the times I tried to use this is when the Pixel 4 was flat on a table, and oftentimes it just didn't read my hand gestures at all. Another time where I tried to use this feature where it might be really helpful is in my car when I'm driving. So I was trying to skip a song with my hand and it wasn't registering on the device. Eventually, I was able to get it to work, and it required a very, very broad swipe and a very, very fast one that almost made me hit the passenger inside of my car, and I found that it was much, much easier just to simply reach my hand over and hit the skip button on the phone, or to use a voice command to do the same thing. A hand gesture system like this needs to be more accurate to be useful. If users are going to use this and it's going to misfire 50% of the time, it's not a system they can rely on. As soon as the first swipe fails, I'm already frustrated and I don't want to do it again. If a second swipe fails, it's why are we even bothering wasting time? And more often than not, the phone is already in my hand. I don't need to be doing any sort of hand waving gestures when I can just simply press on the display. Now, there is one feature that I did find useful with this new radar system. However, I don't think it's worth the added component cost in this phone. And that feature is when your alarm goes off. Now, the radar inside of the Pixel 4 can sense that your hand is coming towards it, and then it will automatically silence the alarm. Again, you could choose to do those hand gestures to swipe that alarm away, but one swipe dismisses the alarm and the other swipe snoozes the alarm, and I just couldn't find a consistent way to enable one or the other. Google also has what they call a Pixel Neural Core inside of the Pixel 4 this year. This helps it with new features like on-device transcription. The transcription is not 100% accurate, but it is really cool how it gives you a text transcription on device, and it also saves the audio clip at the same time so you can go back and listen to the audio. It also timestamps the conversations, and I can see this being really useful for interviews or taking notes. The Neural Core should also offer faster Google Assistant launching for apps on the device. Alright, let's get to what most people probably want to know about the Google Pixel 4, and that is the camera performance on this phone. So the Pixel 4 now has two camera lenses. This comes in the form of a wide-angle lens that has a 12-megapixel sensor at an f1.7 aperture. This year, the Pixel 4 comes equipped with a second lens, a telephoto lens at 16 megapixels with an f-stop of 2.4. The big trend in smartphones this year was adding an ultra-wide-angle camera, but Google thought that the telephoto was more useful. Just like its predecessor, the Pixel 4 offers an excellent camera. Google's computational photography is still impressive. It does this by combining multiple images together, and in combination with HDR+, it processes those images, and for the most part, the Pixel 4 takes sharp, detailed photos and can capture a wide dynamic range and with good exposure. I find that the Pixel 4 tends to boost contrast on photos, and that can at times give for a more dramatic look that really makes the picture pop for me. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the images I'm getting on the Pixel 4's main shooter. Now, I think a lot of people are very interested to see how it compares against the brand new iPhone 11 and iPhone 11 Pro. And that's because many people now consider the iPhone 11 and the iPhone 11 Pro one of the best smartphone cameras. I took a few sample photos putting the iPhone 11 and the Pixel 4 head to head. The first photo I'm comparing is a building with the sky in the background. I preferred the iPhone Smart HDR as opposed to Google's HDR+. It did a better job capturing the highlights and made for a more pleasing photo, but it is a pretty close result. The second photo is a landscape with some buildings in the background, and the sun is behind in the early morning. Both the iPhone and Pixel 4 did a pretty good job here, and I honestly think both of them are good. Personally, I do prefer the increased dynamic range and highlights again from the iPhone. I felt it captured the early morning golden hour effect, but I can see why people might like the Pixel 4 photo better. So for this one, I'm gonna give it a tie. The third photo this time has a human subject. The Pixel photo here looks a little too contrasty for me, especially on the skin tones. I felt like my face looked like a cartoon character. I think the iPhone 11 here handled the skin tone better, although I'll give the Pixel credit for not blowing out the highlight in the sky. The fourth photo is of a building with the sun just directly above it in the background. We can see the Pixel 4 brightens up the area more than the iPhone, but it's very grainy and loses detail in the trees and the buildings. I appreciate how it's trying to bring out the colors of the sky, but it sacrifices detail in the rest of the picture. For this photo, this time we have an indoor setting. We can see the iPhone is definitely shifting towards the warmer tones, while the Pixel 4 is shifting towards cooler blue tones. I prefer the warmness of the iPhone, but the Pixel definitely wins on sharpness and detail in the face and jacket. The last photo is of a bike. The Pixel here surprisingly didn't do a good job of capturing detail, and the colors look a little bit flat. The iPhone not only wins in detail, but the red of the bike and the yellow of the bike stand are more vivid. I prefer the iPhone 11 a lot for this one. Like I mentioned before, the Pixel 4 this year is opting to go for a telephoto zoom rather than an ultra-wide camera. And here I have to give Google credit. Now, Google is saying that the zoom for the Pixel 4 is using a combination of a 2x optical zoom along with Google's super zoom software. Furthermore, the sensor on the Pixel 4 XL is a 16 megapixel sensor, where the iPhone 11 Pro only has a 12 megapixel sensor for the telephoto lens. The results for the Pixel are good, and the Pixel 4 at extended zoom ranges offers much more detail in comparison to the iPhone 11 zoom. Almost every photo I took with the iPhone 11 Pro's telephoto and the Pixel 4's telephoto, I preferred the photo on the Pixel 4. The extra detail you get from the 16 megapixel sensor just made the pictures better, while the iPhone 11 Pro just lost way too much detail and looked fuzzy when going up to that 8x zoom. So even though Google opted not to put an ultra-wide camera system into the Pixel 4, and I know a lot of people are disappointed by that, you are getting a very good zoom lens. Furthermore, Google is now using the 2x lens for portrait mode on the Pixel 4. However, they don't give you the option to revert back to the old 1x portrait mode. Portrait mode is hit or miss. It does a good job most of the time with edge detection, but it can sometimes fall flat. This one cuts off parts of my face. The iPhone 11 here isn't perfect either though, neglecting to apply the blur in between my arm. The front-facing camera on the Pixel 4 also offers super sharp photos. However, by default, there is a natural mode enabled, and that definitely smooths out the face a little too much for my liking, so I would recommend you turn that off. Another area that Google really exceeded in last year was its night sight camera. And that is a mode that still works really well on the Pixel 4. I much prefer how the iPhone 11 toggles this night mode automatically rather than having to go into a separate mode in the camera app. Before I get into the comparison, I think both phones do a good job here, and it's a pretty amazing thing to even see photos taken this well with such a low amount of light. But I have to say, I think the iPhone 11 has not only caught up with its night mode, but I think it surpassed the Pixel. The Pixel 4's night sight tends to shift more towards blue hues. For example, let's compare these two photos. Now, at first glance, the iPhone 11 and the Pixel 4 look almost identical here, except when we look at the building in the background. The edge of the building is blue on the Pixel 4, which also tends to lose a lot of detail. Also, look at this orange lit scarecrow scene where the iPhone 11 keeps the orange lighting bouncing off, hitting the pavement and the car. The Pixel 4 turns that into a bluish hue again and loses a lot more detail than the iPhone 11. Now, smartphone cameras aren't just about photo, they're also about video as well. And video recording on the Pixel 4 is also a mixed bag. The Pixel 4 is limited to 4K 30 frames per second, with no options for either 24 frames per second for a more cinematic look or 60 frames per second for higher frame rates. Google even responded on Twitter by saying that they're not focusing on 4K video for 60 frames per second because most of its users just use 1080p video, which I think is a really poor excuse. Again, comparing it to something like the iPhone 11, the iPhone 11 video is much better to me, offering better color, contrast, and dynamic range, and much more flexibility with recording options for either 4K at 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, or 60 frames per second, all with extended high dynamic range. The video quality on the iPhone 11 also seems more detailed, where at other points the Pixel 4 can look a little bit grainy. This time we're recording the video on the Pixel 4. As you can see, we are using the rear camera, this time at 4K at 30 frames per second. We're a little more limited here with the options. We don't have the option for either 24 frames per second or 60 frames per second like the iPhone 11. Okay, here's a test of the iPhone 11. This time we are recording it with the rear camera at 4K at 24 frames per second. As you can see, we're also getting some of that extended high dynamic range. The iPhone 11 is also rubbing salt into the wound on the Pixel here because the front-facing camera on the iPhone 11 can also shoot 4K at 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second with high dynamic range, and it can also shoot at 60 frames per second, something not even the rear camera can do on the Pixel 4. The Pixel 4's front-facing camera is limited to just 1080p. Okay, now this is a test of the Google Pixel 4 XL with the front camera. We're walking around kind of doing a selfie style video. We're gonna test the mic quality on the video as well as the video quality. Okay, and as you can see, we are also taking a test recording from the iPhone 11 this time on the front-facing camera. Now, as you can see, unlike the Pixel 4, we are also getting 60 frames per second. This is something that the Pixel 4 cannot do. Overall, the iPhone 11 just provides better video quality on not only the rear camera, but the front-facing camera as well. I don't think this is a controversial statement, and I would really like to see Google focus more on video capabilities for next year's Pixel. Alright, so in conclusion, the Pixel 4 XL, this was kind of a difficult phone to review, and that's because I honestly pretty much enjoyed most of my experience with using this phone. And that's mostly because the Pixel 4 combines a no-thrills design with a good display, good speakers, great face unlocking, and one of the best smartphone cameras on the market, with not only a great wide angle, but also great telephoto capabilities as well. And let me be clear, the Pixel 4 XL is a good phone. I don't think most people would call it a bad phone. But the Pixel 4 XL doesn't live in a vacuum. It faces ever-increasing competition from across the fence with the iPhone 11, and in its own backyard with a plethora of Android competitors. And there lies the problem for the Pixel 4 XL. The utilitarian design doesn't scream cutting-edge flagship phone, and Google's focus this year on a Project Soli radar chip seems to be a costly and wasted effort. At least for now. I know this is Google's first attempt at using this brand new radar technology, and maybe they can refine it in a year and be able to offer something more revolutionary. But again, this is now. This is the Pixel 4, not the Pixel 5, and the gimmicky hand gestures don't work well enough to currently justify the added component and development costs. And I think that's my main problem for the Pixel 4 XL. Like I said, it's not a bad phone. I just think it's a little bit overpriced for what you're getting. I think what I would have preferred for this year's phone is for Google not to invest in that Project Soli radar system and to drop the price by around $100. Because, let's be honest, the Pixel 4 starting at $799 and the Pixel 4 XL starting at $899 look overpriced when you compare it to something like the iPhone 11, which starts at just $699 this year, or another Android competitor like the OnePlus 7 Pro, which also retails for $699. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think about the Google Pixel 4 XL in the comments below. As always, if you liked the video, make sure you give it a like. If you want to see more from my channel, make sure you're subscribed. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.